blanks real quick. Small groups. People cannot make meaningful, write that in, meaningful relationships with a large group. Rather, people find lifelong relationships within small groups. People will come to your church to hear the preacher, that's the fill-in. Church, to hear the preacher or the ministries you offer their family. They become lifelong participants and fully committed disciples because of the relationships they make. Small group relationships are the glue. We're going to take a quiz on this after that holds people in the church long enough for the vision to captivate them. That's your fill in the blanks. Well, so let's talk real quick. Groups, usually when we talk about groups and we sit with pastors and talk about groups, there's like three buckets of pastors. I love groups, I need groups, and I hate groups. Or the third one really is, I've tried groups, groups don't work at my church. We hear that over and over. So hopefully if you're in that category of, I've tried groups, groups don't happen at my church, you'll still listen in, because I would give you a little bit of a pushback. Groups are happening at your church with your church people. They may not be your groups. Your people are in groups somewhere. They're teacher clubs, they're parents clubs. They're gathering somewhere with other people. So let's try to leverage how we can gather them at the church. So best practices, we're going to split this up a little bit. And we've got number one, focus your groups on 5 purposes. I'll share a little bit, then you guys can kick in and we'll kind of move through these. And so number 1 is community. So this is the why. Why groups? Okay, this is know your why, know your purpose. Don't just offer groups just because it's another thing to do. In fact, we say we want to be a church of groups. We don't just want to be a church that offers groups. We're a church of groups. So number 1 is community. And with community, that's where life transformation really happens. Life transformation happens in the context of relationships. You need to move people together. Community is just critically important. Groups are the group of people. Let me explain something. Your group, let's say you have a group at your church and they're studying the book of John and it meets Tuesday nights from 7 to 8. Your group is not the book of John from 7 to 8 p.m. Your group is the people that are gathering. The book of John just happens to be the thing that they all said yes to. The 7 to 8 just happens to be the time that they gather. But the group is the people. In fact, the most important part of the group might take place 20 minutes before the group when that person shows up early and goes, hey, can we talk? And they're going to tell you about a marriage problem before everybody else showed up. Or 15 minutes later before they let everybody leave and then they're the last one there because they needed to tell you about something going on in their life. The group is the people, the gathering of the people. It's not the topic, the book, the session, or the time period. You're building community. And if you go and you never open your book that night to chapter 7 because something happened in community that you guys need to share about, pray about, and talk about, community is why you're having groups. You need that. Second one is growth. I'm going to talk spiritual growth. This is a good vehicle for discipleship. This is where they can unpack spiritual truths. This is where they can understand some scripture. This is where spiritual lives go a little bit deeper. I think you could twist it and say numeric growth too, where you can invite people that are coworkers and friends and families to your group too. So growth could go numerically or depth. Let me pause real quick. Community or growth? Anything to chip in on?
Just to reiterate, man, the growth spiritually, yes, absolutely. And we always just encourage our folks to, hey, use this as a way to invite people to church. Don't say that. But if, they're never going to come on a Sunday, they're never going to come to our service, man, but they'll come to the bowling alley. They'll come to have a meal. And so just think about it and preach that a lot.
Then prayer. We never want to neglect prayer. Prayer needs, praying for people. This is where they can learn to pray out loud, maybe for the very first time. This is really good. Prayer is a non-negotiable in groups. Mission is opportunity for people to serve. It's a great place to encourage that, do something together. And then and then mission and service I would kind of put together. So kind of why you exist. So that's the why we do groups: community, spiritual growth, get people moving in the same direction. Let's move on to number 2. Alex, you can take this one, I think.
Yeah, it says offer both interest-based and overt discipleship groups. For us early on, I didn't grow up in a context where small groups, for us, small groups was dividing the church. So it was hard for us to get on this, I hate to call it, it's not really a trend, but you know what I mean. The idea of small groups was hard for us. In fact, it really took us close to 2 years for that to see the fruit of it. And so don't be discouraged if at first you don't succeed type of deal. But this is a place where you can have some creativity. I'll kind of share what we do. And then I don't know if you guys will have something to add. We call them seasons. So throughout the year, we have 3 different times throughout the year that we're very strategic on when small groups run. I recommend having breaks in between for many reasons. One of them being just giving your people some rest, but also allowing life to happen. So for example, back to school season, we don't have small groups. There's just too much going on. But in our 3 seasons, the first season, our goal is to have everybody doing the same curriculum. This is how we do it at our church. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. We have everybody doing the same curriculum. We use and leverage our relationship with the Right Now Media app, or rightnowmedia.com, and we use that, or I use it to pick what curriculum they're on. The second season, I give our leaders some freedom. And so I say, hey, here are some parameters, here are some resources I want y'all to pick from. But you guys know your people. You know what kind of group you want to run, whether it be financial, book study, families, marriage. Go ahead and pick from this bucket. That's the second season. And then last, towards the end of the year, our goal is to move into sermon-based small groups, which seems or sounds hard. Because I got to come up with questions for every sermon. No. It's really a lot of the same questions for every, open-ended questions, really for every small group to begin dialogue with what you're preaching on every week. So that's kind of how we do it at our church.
Alex, what I like about the seasons that you talked about, I think we had done groups and we called them life groups.
Right.
And you were in a group for life. And it didn't matter if you liked those people or not. The only way to get out of that group was to quit
Or die.
the group, and then you would never come to church because you didn't want to see those people because you just quit their group. And nobody could get into that group because they know this whole group had been together for 3 or 4 years. So we went to that model that you're talking about. What we like about it with the seasons model is that there's on-ramps and off-ramps. So depending on the rhythm, if you like the group or don't like the group, guess what? There's an off-ramp coming at the next season, and you can get off of that group. Or if summer's coming and you know you got a lot of sports with your kids, it's okay. You can take the off-ramp and you're not quitting anything. And then the next season ramps up. Guess what? There's another on-ramp. So I think that's what's helped us with the seasons is the on and off.
And you can really look to leaders and people that need to be in groups and say, you really can do anything for 10 to 12 weeks. So let's just jump in. If you don't like it, this thing's over in a month. Don't worry about it. And leadership, recruitment, and development is, can you host this thing for 10 to 12 weeks versus, hey, would you like to put 12, 15 strangers in your house? They're going to be in your living room for the rest of your life. They're just going to be hanging out.
We call
there.
that a gang where I'm from. This is Waukegan. But yeah, it's super important. If I could just add one more quick thing. If you're starting off small groups for the first time and trying to figure out when should we do them, look at a calendar and look at the times where you're busy, your family's most busy. Those are the times you want to take breaks. So for us, mid-November until February, we don't have small groups. There's just too much happening in our context. Beginning of the school season, just too much happening. End of the school year, everybody's taking vacations, there's graduations, there's not too much happening small group wise. So that's how we do it. So be very strategic about your seasons or your semesters and based off of what's happening in your life or in family's life.
The other thing on, answering, if it's, sermon or interest-based or discipleship groups. If you're going more that marketplace mentality of there's a lot of different interest groups and you can choose anything, I would encourage to maybe identify a couple anchor groups that you always have. Maybe that new believers group or a men's group, a women's group, a study of the Holy Spirit, something that you're like Financial Peace University, something like that where you're like, we do a lot of groups, but we always have a finance, a marriage, and a parenting group, something like that. So there's those anchor groups that you can hang on to. So let's keep moving on then. That's good. Number 3 is, Evan?
So offer childcare. And so when you look at your interest-based or your discipleship groups, I would encourage you to have some groups that probably have no childcare. So maybe it's a group that doesn't want to have kids, which is okay. But then there are some groups that do have childcare. So what I would say is to be open and honest with this group is for kids. This group is not kid-friendly. And so then with childcare, what a best practice could be is to anybody that I would hire childcare for that night so that mom doesn't keep running out of the room to get the kids that are by themselves in the room next door with all the toys, and the mom is leaving and the dad keeps leaving, and you've got all this in and out traffic of your group. So go ahead and hire childcare. A couple ways that you can pay for that childcare is you could run it through the budget of your church. If you're doing a budget like we talked about earlier, have the budget of the church pay for that childcare. The other way is if the parents come that night, they pay and they all split up childcare for that night and they could pay that way. What I'd recommend as best practice is to go ahead and do a flat rate of what you're paying childcare per hour across all of the groups. That way you don't have the generous group, paying that teenager $25 an hour, and then the other group paying $10 an hour. You're never gonna have a childcare worker that wants to do the 10 when they can do the 25. Okay, so just do it a flat overall, and then I'd recommend doing background checks we talked about earlier on all childcare. What if they're under 18 and you can't do a background check? You can still background check them without going through the system. There's social media you could background check. You could do references that they have to submit a reference from 2 teachers, or do a parent has to submit a reference so you get some sort of understanding about that. But I would offer childcare. What that does is eliminate any excuse for parents saying that they can't sign up for a group because they have kids. So you're just eliminating that out of the gate for them. So it's a great place to be able to have families come together, provide childcare for them so they don't have to worry about that. Anything else on your guys' end of what you guys have done with childcare?
Man, don't skip that. We did. It's not worth skipping. It's so important. Take the time, invest in it for sure. Well, that was good stuff. I'm taking all of it.
Yeah, it's you want to eliminate every excuse possible for people to get into groups. And so if it costs a little money to eliminate a big obstacle, knock that out. Open up the doorway so everybody can attend a group. Let's move to number 4. Train your group leaders. Let me tackle this, and then I'll pitch to these guys to maybe chip in on this. But I believe that every group leader needs trained. Even when we do semesters or seasons, the way we do it is everyone goes through training, even if they've already been a group leader in the past, because it's a refresher for them, and it's extremely rewarding for new group leaders to be in a room and see the other group leaders. So it's a little bit of a synergy of creating this catalyst of we're getting ready to jump into another semester of groups. Let's get all of our leaders in the room. Let's train, let's pray for them, let's have a lot of inspiration of why groups are really important over the next 10 to 12 weeks, and then send them out for their semester or their season to do this. And so training for us, I'm covering things like what is the purpose of groups? Just go to the basics. Like community is important. Everybody's praying. Just go through the why. And then here's a big one: is the expectations of the group leader. So we want them to know what are their expectations. You're going to see this through all 12 weeks. You're going to take attendance. You're going to pray for them daily or weekly. You're going to reach out to them if they don't show up. You're going to be their shepherd for the next 12 weeks. You're going to let us know if you've heard something in group that's above your pay grade. And so you just let them know expectations. And what you're doing is also removing some of their unknown fears Like, ooh, what if someone shows up at my house and says this? Like, we're there for you. We'll help you. And so expectations, we explain the logistical details because in that night, some people are in church space, some people are at homes, some people are at restaurants. And so we talk about who needs keys, who needs access to the building, who's got childcare, who's running out of, like they've called 3 different people and they don't have childcare lined up. We'll come alongside and help you. So we deal with all the logistical details that night in training. I have a whole list of just frequently asked questions so I can answer their questions before they have any. And so we go over that. And I really try to eliminate their fears. And then we close with a bunch of prayer. Just like, let's pray for these groups because we really do believe life transformation happens in the context of relationships. So let's do some great shepherding over these next 10 to 12 weeks. What else in training? You guys do anything on training wise or?
Yeah, so we, again, because it was new to us, I didn't grow up in a small group environment. So if there's anybody in the room that didn't grow up that way, what we did was we did not reinvent the wheel. We went online, we asked other friends in the community that had been running small groups successfully. We use a lot of Church of the Highlands stuff, churchofthehighlands.com. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. Don't reinvent the wheel. You're gonna have to tweak it a little bit to fit your context, but small groups is not new. It might be new to us, so don't make it so hard on yourself. Just keep it simple. And then we also do training before every season, which might be a lot. I don't know how often you guys. What do y'all do? Once a year or
Every semester. So
every
3
semester. Oh,
times.
same. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's the only thing I would say.
Yeah. You know anything? You good? All right. Well, then, Evan, last one, number 5. It's on you.
Yeah, so create an environment that expects everybody to participate in a small group. And so you may be thinking, how am I going to expect everybody in our church to be in a small group? I think the first thing we have to think through is, what are we asking everybody to be a part of in our church? So we have to put down and look at the church calendar and say, are we doing Sunday morning service? Are we doing Sunday night service? Are we doing Wednesday night service? Are we doing men's breakfast on that Saturday? Are we doing a women's Bible study on Tuesday morning? If you're doing all of those things, asking somebody to be in a small group also isn't going to work. So you have to look at your schedule and say, if we're going to be all bought in on Sunday or for small groups, we've got to eliminate, we've got to simplify, we've got to declutter what we're asking people to be a part of. What we did, we went through a process about 15 years ago where we had all these different ministries, young adults, senior adults, men's, women's, Wednesday nights, and trying to figure all of that out, which none of those are bad things. We were trying to move towards a small group model, and we said, okay, so we've got women's ministry and they're doing these events. What if we went to women's ministry and said, hey, can we transition you into a small group? So all of a sudden they turned into a small group. Same thing with men's. Hey, can we transition you into a small group? And then we challenged them, instead of having one big women's ministry with 50 people, what if we broke that into smaller groups that were interest-based or discipleship-based? And so we were able to simplify the schedule overall. And what you're doing is creating this culture of small groups. Now, once you eliminate the schedule, now you can get more people into small groups. And why do we want people into small groups? So that they can find freedom, because there's freedom when we confess our sins to one another. And that's the goal of what we're trying to do. All of us want our church to grow larger and larger. And as we grow larger and larger, what you have to do overall is to grow smaller and smaller, because we can't grow larger unless we grow smaller. And so that's where this concept of making sure that we have small groups and have a small group environment at our church makes it very healthy. Anything else that you guys have done as far as getting this culture of small groups into your church so they know, man, this is the easy and obvious next step for us?
I think also culture happens from the top down. So I make sure to share small group stories and messages to inspire people to go, well, I need that. So you're shepherding your care, your so-and-so was in the someone was sick, or like their small group leader, their small group gathered around them. It's incredible. You're trying to inspire groups by real life stories. So anytime I'm teaching a message and it has anything to do with pain, past, relationships, I plug groups and say, that's why you ought to be in groups, is because you're going to have people come alongside you and help you during those tough times. And so I'm just plugging groups as a positive a positive value into their life. Because if it's just one more thing they have to do during the week, I wouldn't sign up for that either. I'm busy. I don't need one more thing. If you're offering me life and value, I want that and I need that. And so that starts at the top with messages and platform time of really explaining how important it is to put yourself in the position to be around some other people to provide care, support, and help.
That's very good, man. I was going to say the same thing, so I got nothing else to say.
Now, we actually have, from the age of 3 years old to up, we have preschoolers in groups. So on Sunday mornings, they're in groups with a small group leader that is saying the same thing that a good Christian parent would say to them. Elementary, they're in a small group leader that's with them every single week on a Sunday morning. Our teenagers are in small groups, and so it's just kind of you just kind of build it throughout the life of your church of, okay, let's get everybody in a group so people know you come to Sunday morning, you get into a row, and then during the week, you've got to get into a circle where you can look face to face with people.
And I say that over and over. We have to move people from rows to circles because relationships don't happen in rows. And you guys all know that. Looking at the back of someone's head on Sunday doesn't do us any good at all. So we've got to move from rows to circles. And they probably hear that 25 times a year, 50% of the time on a Sunday, we're talking about get people out of the rows into circles.
Yeah, and last thing I would just add is it's pretty biblical. Small groups as a title, we've made that title up, but I mean, read the Bible, New Testament church. There's a lot of great small group stories in most of the messages and teachings that we present on a Sunday.
It says they went into the synagogue and then they went into the homes.
That's it.
And they did both. They did both. It wasn't an either or. Yeah. It wasn't, well, should we do Sundays or should we do groups? No, they were in big environments. They were in small environments. They were in the rows. Now let's get them into circles. So let's take some questions. You guys may have some questions and we can answer as best as we can.
I think we're good.
There we go.
Okay, my question is, how do you vet the people that are going to be in charge of the small groups? Because let's be honest, we're all pastors. We got some wackadoodles, that's what I call them, that like are people that are always, they're gung-ho about stepping up, but their doctrine's going to be off, the things that they teach are going to be off. And how do you vet those people and weed those people out?
Evan just said under his breath, it's messy. However, there is some things you can do to do some vetting. So to be a group leader, we have a bit of an application process where you apply, or I don't know if it's application, but you fill out a form to be a group leader. You explain why. You give us a little bit of your spiritual background. You tell us the topic that you're interested in. I would look at that, and or any of our staff would look at that. If there's a red flag at all, then there's conversation. And then if you get that one person that you're like, man, they want to be a group leader so bad, but they're that guy, they're that person, they're not going to be good. I'm always suggesting them to be a co-leader. And then I have a conversation with my friend Alex. I'm like, Alex, I know you're leading this group. Is there any way you'll take Johnny as your co-leader? Because Johnny can't do this by himself. But I do want Johnny, Johnny can take attendance. He can be there. And so I will partner that person up with one of the veterans and say, hey, would you like to co-lead with so-and-so this semester? We do we're getting to do background checks on everyone now, so that side. Theology, we review all the course, what book they're going to do, if they're going to do right now video. We look at that to make sure. And then at the end of the day, something wacky is going to happen and be said in group. If you're only going to do groups, if there's a full insurance plan that everything in that room is going to be okay, then we're not going to do groups. Yeah. But the importance of community outweighs that, because we can always come up and clean up some theology if we hear about it a week later. We've got to get people into circles, and then we got to wear some discerning hats of what's happening in that home. And then the other thing is, we don't just release them for 12 weeks. Like, you're checking in on them. Hey, how'd group go? How's it going? So you can, hopefully someone's flying a flag if something's weird's happening in one of the groups.
And we had a group in summer once that we had heard that it was a family group meeting at a house. And is this the one where we heard they were drinking beer at the group?
Shots.
And doing shots, and it was just kind of they weren't far along in the relationship. They still had a little bit of residue, but we just kind of had to come around, help them, and then we actually created a policy.
Hey, we have a policy against
Okay,
taking shots at groups. Like that was easy. Like yeah, but you can hopefully you don't go too long before you can clean that up. A day or two.
You had talked about breaking up a small group of 50 people. What's the optimum size?
Oh, I think an optimum size is 4 to 12. Yeah, if you're 3 and someone doesn't show up, then it's really awkward. It's just 2 people. 4 is 4 to 12. Quick answer.
A couple questions. You talked about seasons. Can you specifically give the time frames in the calendar year where those seasons look? And the second question is, my church, everything happens on Wednesday nights. How do you work small groups into just Wednesday night functions, or do you move away from Wednesday nights? What does that look like?
Let's start with dates first. Yours and ours might be a little different. So
Yeah, so these are kind of rough dates right now. So like February to March, January we would say for prayer. So February to like end of March, and then we're ramping up to Easter really hard, take a break. Then right after Easter, we start up again in May till about July-ish. And then we take a longer break and actually start up again at the very end of September, when our attendance is hitting back up. And then I think your other question was, I had an answer to it. I just don't remember the
Wednesdays.
question.
So all their
Wednesdays.
programming is on Wednesdays. How do you
Yeah.
start to transition that?
Here's where our church is at a place where we're thinking Wednesdays. We have prayer gatherings every Wednesday night. And so with small groups, that has created some challenges. And so what we're doing is we're looking at not canceling our prayers gathering. We're going to have our first Wednesday of the month be that big face-to-face with God is what we call it. And then our small groups in between, or Bible study or whatever else, still has to include prayer. So our prayer gatherings are still happening. They're just in a different space. So I would at least consider or think about maybe moving towards a once a month Wednesday, or even do it seasonally, like in between your seasons. Maybe that's when you're Wednesday heavy or midweek heavy. I would caution against that, but just kind of maybe reposition how you're using your Wednesday nights. Or last, I promise, before small groups, we did something called re-engage, which we were in a room half this size, but we had tables set up just like this, and I had printed out questions. We opened up, and then we did small groups within one building. It wasn't really small groups, but it was a great way for us to train ourselves on how to get to small groups. We had a table leader, AKA small group leader, so on and so forth. So you can repurpose your Wednesdays to introduce small groups maybe.
That's good. Our season's pretty similar. February, March, April, that's 12 weeks. And May is off, but it's really not off in the small group world because you're recruiting and promoting for June and July. Then you have August off, and then September, October, November, and then we have December and January off. But those off weeks are not off, or off months, because you are recruiting new leaders and promoting the next semester. So I mean, you're always talking groups. You're either actively in groups or you're actively promoting the next group. So, but those are how our break is.
So the answer may seem obvious, but can you give some important distinctions between the interest-based group and the overt discipleship? And like, what really different is happening in one versus the other?
Yeah, so interest-based could be a badminton group, a running group, a basketball group, a basket weaving group, swimming group. That would be interest-based. It's centered around, maybe in the very beginning, they pray for each other, read a scripture. It's 3 or 4 minutes of that, and then 45 minutes to an hour of an interest. The discipleship group would be what they're talking about, like Right Now Media, going through the book of John together. So it's more of, an hour of discussion around a topic and more Bible-based.
And the purpose of interest-based is you have people that have never been in church, and that they're probably not going to sign up for 12 weeks of the book of John.
Yep.
But there's probably somebody out there that'll play basketball for a while, get to know some people. Next time around, now they're going to do a marriage group with their spouse. And then next time around, they're going to do a Saturday morning men's coffee and breakfast. And so interest is probably a little on the hook and the new, get
They're
people
all
connected.
excuses to build relationships, is what it is. Yep.
Explain with your groups the liability. Is it under the church umbrella or the homeowners or both? Because I know if something happened at a home, then the homeowners is going to say it's their insurance. Church insurance will say it's going to be the homeowners. The homeowners is going to say it's the church. So who's the reliability of it?
I'm going to invite Pastor Phil up to the table. And Andrew has a microphone. I think he could answer that. It's probably both can cover insurance, but actually, Andrew, you might be the best person.
Yeah, I think most ministry, like if you're getting your church property and liability insurance from a ministry-focused provider, then typically something that a church-sanctioned activity off-site is still going to be covered from a liability perspective. And then usually, same thing on the homeowner side. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter that it's a church thing. It's still going to be covered under your homeowner's liability policy. Now, there's probably going to be some arm wrestling between the insurance companies, but it should be covered either way.
Sam, liability is purely in the hands of the attorneys who try to file suit. They'll file suit against every potential judgment they can find. So it'll be the court that determines that, but they're going to, we've had cases in the Assemblies of God where a church, we shared this at the Secretary of Treasurer's meeting not long ago, a church in a district affiliated church had a gathering at a home and a deck collapsed. And that rolled through the church up to the district. And home, they'll sue everyone they can. So it is not a simple answer as to this is where the liability lands. It's, you're going to be responsible to some degree.
One more, last one. Roy went over a little bit, so we're going to go over one more.
So when it comes to kind of maintaining the groups, and I love the thing with the seasons and transitioning, I know this might depend on church and groups. Do you see more, I guess, development of one group sticking together, or do you try to mix them up with every season? Do you leave that open? I know, there was the whole, you're stuck with this group for life, but sometimes they develop that relationship and that's just permanent. Like, do you encourage one way or the other?
Yeah, for us, a lot of the older women or the older men's group like to stick together. I personally try to mix it up because our church is a lot of younger. I think our median age went up to like 28 years old over the past few years, and so we're trying to do better with intergenerational. So I'm trying to intentionally move it around a little bit for that stuff.
We have both. So I have some groups that it's probably been the same people for several semesters, but they're still public and enrolled. Like, people can jump in, so they have to tell their people, because if they cap theirs out at say 10 people, well then a lot of times what they do is say, hey, it opens tomorrow. You better get online and get into our group, or it'll book out. And then we also there's attrition where one or two families leaves, but we have some like that. And then we have some semesters where everyone's pretty new. And I just don't police it. I just think it's organic. And I told someone the other day, it's like groups organically rise and fall. So if it's no good, then it'll die on its own, and then next semester they won't have it. If it's incredible, you may have to duplicate it and get 2 of them. We had a women's Bible study that book took off. Next semester, 2 ladies led that book because there was a huge need, and it was great.